Hello, my name is William, the Avid reader, and today I'm reviewing Homage to Catalonia, written by George Orwell in 1938. So, this is the final non-fiction book he wrote, and it's his sixth book. So he wrote this in 1938, and it talks about it's a memoir about his experience during the 6 months he spent in Spain and a lot, especially in Catalonia, and that this is from the December, December 1936, January 1937 until June 1937, July 1937. And he talks about being in the militias and the anarcho-syndicalist system of militias in the beginning of the war, and the trade unions, and how there was equality between the officers and the soldier. In the beginning there was no pay difference, and it was in large part the militias who fought the war against the fascists in the Spanish Civil War beginning. And then he talks about the communist takeover of the country and of Catalonia and Barcelona, and this was dependent on since Soviet Russia was the number one exporter of arms to Spain, so they got a lot of influence in the government. So their police force, for example, eventually in June 1937, they got their police forces. They began to have the ability to arrest people at random, at arbitrary. So they started arresting the POM members. So POM was a Marxist socialist political party in Spain, as Spain had many factions on both sides of the war. And he says that there were two main factions on the Republican side. So you've got the anarchists, who are allied with the left-wing socialists, and then you've got the communists, who are allied with more right-wing socialists, and with the liberals, because the communists believe more in a centralized form of government, while the anarchists believed in a form of power to the people. And the communists favored, at least temporarily, that private property would be able to retain, while the anarchists seized a lot of private property and they burned a lot of churches down. What did he do all this time? So he was 6 months in Spain, and he served in the POM militias. It was formed by a former Trotskyist, but he's not a Trotskyist, even if he was labeled as one. And he didn't really, when he came to Spain, it's said here in the first appendix here, because you've got the fifth of the book is like appendixes that put at the end, which if you don't really care about the political situation in Spain, you can skip it. I think it was actually the most interesting part of the book. He talks that he didn't know what the difference of the acronyms of PSUC and CNT and POOM and all these different political parties in the Spanish Republic. And he joined the POM, but he never became an official member of the POM political party, but he served with them at the front. But at the front they never really fought against fascists, especially in the beginning. They were more worried. There was not lots of shooting. I mean, you had some snipers from the Spanish side who shot some Republicans, but most of the deaths and injuries in the beginning came from accidental shootings on their own side, friendly fire, because they were not careful with guns. They had no trigger discipline. They shot at each other in a joking manner, and a lot of people got hurt and killed that way. And George Orwell, he was actually shot by a fascist, surprisingly, and he was shot in the neck. And the Spanish doctors said that it was a surprise that they said that he wouldn't regain his voice, even if he eventually did. And when he comes to the hospital, the other soldiers remove his valuables. So the militias were disorganized. They were ineffective. They barely understood how guns work, and guns jammed off them. And the communist guns never went to the anarchists, since when there was a try to disarm the anarchists in Barcelona, the people in Barcelona, it was so said that the anarchists were hoarding arms from the front, even if both the communists and the anarchists were hoarding arms. but the anarchists at the front never, and the Marxists, socialists at the front never got any weapons really from the communists, so they had less effective weapons than the communists. So the communist fighters, the soldiers were good, he Orwell said, at the front, but it was the leadership that was evil for on the communists. And he talks about the alliance between the bourgeoisie, so-called bourgeoisie, small bourgeoisie, and a lot of middle class people. They could join the Communist Party because it was more moderate than the anarchists. So there was a big split between anarchists and communists, and there was heavy smearing between both sides. Especially the communists smeared heavily the POM and a bit less the anarchists. After the May skirmish in Barcelona between communists and anarchists, the communists began purging the POM people and put them in prison. And George Orwell believed that the libel of the war done by each side was that there was no effective debate and discussion on how to direct this war successfully. He believed that the communist strategies in war against the fascists were better, but internally it was worse. So he believes that libeling on the Republican side will doom the Spanish Republic eventually. And soldiers, of course, worried more about not being cold and about being fed than about killing fascists at the front. There was no seriousness really in the beginnings of the war. It's a short book, it's 250 pages, and there's not that much to discuss of it. You can basically remember there were two main factions on the Republic side, communists and anarchists. And at the front in the beginning there was no real fighting between, but the militias at least resisted fascism at first, and they were the ones who carried on the war initially, even if there wasn't a lot of fighting. And this is Orwell's memoir of the Spanish Civil War, and it's only the first. It doesn't include all of the Spanish Civil War since it was only there 6 months, but it's an interesting read. So, how would I rate Homage to Catalonia? So, I've noticed so far for the Orwell books I've read that his non-fiction book, his memoirs, aren't as good as his literary works, his fiction works. So I would rank this 7 out of 10. So I prefer this to, for example, I prefer this to Down and Out in Paris and London, but it wasn't as good as Burmese Days or Coming Up for Air or his other fiction works I've read so far. So yeah, 7 out of 10. So better than Down and Out of Paris, but still a 7. So it's a decent read, and you learn a bit about the Spanish Civil War, and it doesn't really talk about the fascist side. That's more about the internal struggles and how life is as a soldier, as a militiaman, and how he had to go underground during the purge of the POM members. But yeah, I don't have that much to say about it. It's a decent book. You should read it if you're interested about the Spanish Civil War, and if you want to understand the internal struggles of the Second Spanish Republic during the war. But yeah, 7 out of 10. So George Orwell, you wrote this as a decent job, and for now at least your writings of non-fictions aren't as good as your writing of fiction. So we'll see about the remaining books I have to review later on. So that was the Avid Reader's review of Homage to Catalonia, written by George Orwell in 1938. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I will see you guys next time.